Hey everybody, this is Joe. Thank you for watching my Giga Texas construction update video.
One thing that I would like to mention that has to do with changing of operations here at Giga Texas, and it goes again with much of what I've been showing you over the last year, and that has to do with the West Support Facility and that new end-of-line structure, that large white facility on that west side next to the outbound lot.
Let's take a moment and orient you to the areas that we will be discussing. Now, the left-hand side of the screen is called the West Support Facility. It's composed of a number of different facilities, including the West Warehouse on Wheels, or WOW Yard, the Transportation Outbound Lot, the new end-of-line facility, and a variety of other items as well. And on the right-hand side of the screen is the main factory, and that's where the vehicles are produced. The current end-of-line facilities are located. A common question I get is, what is the end of line and what is its function? And it's a very good question. Here's an image from Giga Berlin showing the end of line in that facility. And this is the final steps a product undergoes before it leaves the manufacturing facility. Here's an image I took inside the factory of the Cybertruck end of line. And this is where quality checks, testing, packaging, and sometimes customization of customer requirements can take place. This is a great shot of me in the Cybertruck end-of-line facility area, give you an idea about the size. And what it does is they ensure that correct assembly of the hundreds of intricate components, rigorous quality assessments, and compliant with safety standards are met and checked. Here's an image of the end-of-line in Giga Texas for the Model Y. Now, this ensures that every vehicle rolling off the assembly line meets those criteria by the manufacturer, also the appropriate regulatory bodies, and this is the last step before the vehicles are processed for transportation. Here's a quick illustration of where the Model Y end-of-line facility is currently located in the factory in the upper left, the Cybertruck end-of-line facility in the center of the screen, and the new vehicle routing to the West Support Facility along the west side of the factory. With this image, I show you an older illustration of Giga Texas. It shows you where General Assembly 1 for the Model Y is located, and General Assembly Lines 2 and 3, predominantly where the Cybertruck is currently constructed at this time.
We know that up until recently, the Cybertrucks have been exiting the southwest corner in that temporary exit by those two temporary platforms. And that's because of all the construction that's going on with that south end extension. And once the boring tunnel is operational, that's going to do a lot as far as being able to not only move the Cybertrucks over to the other side, but also the end of line is going to operationally completely move over to the west side. Now for the Model Ys, we know that on the west side, about midpoint of the building, the vehicles exit. That is the end of line for the Model Ys. And when they exit the building currently, that end of line work is basically done. And then they transfer the Model Ys across over to that west outbound lot and the West Support Facility for transport. The change that is coming up, and I've actually shown you that happening with some of my drone flight recently, is that the operations of end of line is completely moving for the Model Ys over to that new West end of line facility. So now the exit point will be the same that we see right now on the west side of the factory. The vehicles will still be driven over to the west side for right now, but the end of line functions are going to be taking place inside that new end of line facility on the west side. And the purpose is now, with these new changes, to complete the final assembly, structural checks, calibrations, and other tests necessary for the vehicles to be able to be shipped. And with that all moving over to the west end of line facility, that is why it is called the end of line facility. And that's going to free up a lot more space for additional production, if you will think about it that way, in the near future here at Giga Texas. So what we're going to see with the drones here now on is a lot more Model Ys and Cybertrucks processing through that end-of-line facility on the west side. And while that's happening, there's going to be reconfiguration work underway for the next few months inside the factory to prepare for what's coming.
If you would like to support my efforts, please consider using these links, which will be in the video description. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons on my YouTube video, as this helps as well. Thank you. My drones are ready and raring to go. Let's go flying over Giga Texas. What a gorgeous morning and sunrise here at Giga Texas, and I hope that you enjoyed the extended views of the sunrise coming up over the factory. It's just a beautiful sight today, and I'm going to start on this west side as we look back at the factory. We'll start turning the drone to the west. And what I want to kind of highlight here based on our introductory discussion is the entire west support facility on this side of the highway. You can see right in front of us the West Warehouse on Wheels, and that's a concept to allow them to store materials and parts for production without actually having to take up space within the factory to do so. Then as we continue to move towards the west, we can see that large material staging yard. We can see this triangular parking lot that's continuing to get some earthwork. We can see the conduits for lighting and possibly charging that have already installed, and more materials on the left, some of those steel corrugated pipes for the underground water management system, and some other materials as well on this site. And as we continue to look back across the entire west support facility, it's a great view of the outbound lot on the upper left and that new end-of-line facility that we talked about. Of course, another great view of the gorgeous sunrise. As we fly over these lower power lines and come in to this material staging yard, a couple things I'll point out. We see a lot more superchargers on the ground here, so that indicates that we're going to see more superchargers installed here on the west side, most likely in the south end of the end of line, to help with the capacity increases that we're going to expect over the coming months. I also see some more of the parts at the bottom of the screen that are being used for the baghouse filtration plant on the east side of casting. Some of those kind of tanks at the bottom of the screen as well, which I think are also slated for that baghouse filtration plant. And we'll see a lot more of that later in the video as it is getting a lot of construction. And on the bottom of the screen, we can see more of the pipe manufacturing and fabrication that is underway to support the south end cooling system for the supercomputer data cluster. Another great view here looking to the east across the outbound lot. We do see a lot of vehicles, many of which are Cybertrucks, but we're also seeing an uptick in the Model Y production. And as we continue to fly along this side of the outbound lot, you can see how the inventory is continuing to change, and there's a lot more of the Model Ys starting to show up, which is a great sign. Now, in the intro, we talked about how the end-of-line processes are moving completely to this new end-of-line facility. And now that that work is definitely underway, I think that's going to help with the production and what we're going to see here on the outbound lot as well. Plus, making that preparation for the shipping of the vehicles a lot more efficient than they have been in the past. As we fly up over the outbound lot, give you another closer view of many of the Model Ys and Cybertrucks that are waiting here for their chance to be picked up and shipped off-site. Also, all of these tents, which are part of some of the final checkouts and categorizing the vehicles, and a good view of that south supercharging site as it is right now. And as I mentioned, we're going to see that expand. And this test track, which is an important role of the end-of-line final processing. And you can kind of get a really good sense here of how it looks. Now, I know that they have this test track and it's operational now, but I have talked to some employees and they would really like to see a bigger test track here on the site, although I don't have any information about when or if or even where that will happen. But hopefully someday we'll get a bigger test track here. And a great view, of course, of this test track and the north end of the building. Since it is early in the morning, we don't see a lot of vehicles entering this north end quite yet. But by the time I finished flying, I was heading home. This was very active, and you can see the 3 doors. The one on the farthest right is where the Model Ys are entering in for their end-of-line processing, and then the middle 2 tend to be used for Cybertrucks at this time. So let's fly to the south along this side of the end-of-line facility, and let's take a look at the work at the superchargers that is going on right now. And I think in that dirt track that we see to the upper left is where we're going to see more of the superchargers installed in the near future. So let's reposition and let's go over to the Boring Company site and take a look at the activity here today. Good close-in view, and we can get a chance to see some of the materials that are being stockpiled here. It looks like a lot of pipes, some black and blue pipes, and we also saw on the right-hand side of the screen now behind the drone more of those concrete liners that are part of the drivable surface inside the tunnel. But right now, most of the effort, besides cleaning up and taking apart the operations on this side for the tunneling, what we do see is more preparation for conduits. You can see those on the ground. You can see that front end loader getting ready to pick up some more. And also, as I maneuver the drone, we'll be able to see how it is continuing to transform the bottom part of the tunnel. We can see this long pipe and some of the other conduit that's going in on the bottom part of the tunnel. Those concrete liners for the drivable surface will be placed on top of that when it is completed. So the bottom 1/8 of the tunnel will be utilities, and the top 7/8 will be for vehicle transport. So anyway, so continued work here on the Boring Company site on the west side of the highway. So let's get ready to cross back over the highway, and we'll resume on the other side. Really nice reflections off the cyber pond. You can get a little chance to see the reflection of the building as well. So I think from a lower altitude it would look really spectacular, especially in the early morning sunrise like today. On this southeast corner, more of the rebar, some more of the items that are being prepared for installation into the chiller plant. We can see a brown pipe segment on the bottom right. And in the middle of the screen, we can see more of those pipe segments that have been attached into that trench, and another segment getting ready for installation. And I will come back from a higher altitude for a better look at the pipe installation. But this is a great view inside this east part of the extension, and some of these items on the ground, including generators. And I will notice that this morning when I got here, most of the south end was dark on the inside. And with all of these generators, what it's telling me is that they are probably doing some electrical work on the inside, and right now they don't have a stable source of electricity, so they're using these generators. It's a good view of all of the screw type piles in that one section in front of the tunnel. We'll see the same thing in front of these other two tunnels as they continue to prepare for the apron work in front of these openings on the perimeter grade beam. And those tunnels do go all the way through the width of the factory, this extension, and then they end with some very large elevators. So this was probably going to be for loading of heavy equipment inside. Another great view here, not only of the apron and the screw type piers, but the preparing of the ground for probably construction, maybe making into a nice entranceway on this southwest corner of the factory. Also on the left-hand side of the screen, all of the glass company items, the workshops, and all of their materials have been moved away. And I think that's just another indication that we're going to see this entire section of the site transformed and turning this into a very nice entranceway for Giga Texas. As we continue to fly to the north along the west side is a great view of the activity here and many of the employees getting ready for the work day to begin as they start with their safety meetings on the left-hand side of the screen. While I'm here, I will give you a good view on the inside. It's great to see many of the ducting on the ground that's being prepared for installation, all of the pipes and interior walls that are being fitted in, and a lot of the other materials and changes that are going on here. We also see this large interior wallway that has been added, and that's kind of segregating off this part of the structure, and this area where the windows are going to be, we see two small mezzanine floors that will connect into the original part of the building. The Cybertrucks are beginning to exit the factory this morning as part of the gearing up of production for the day. And again, as we talked in the intro, this is the temporary exit point until the boring tunnel is completed. And that, of course, is on the interior of the extension of the building and crosses underneath the highway over to where we were seeing the boring company doing the work inside the tunnel, installing the utilities. On the roof section, more of the insulation panels being prepared. On the right-hand side of the screen, we can see those squares. Those are for the water drains, and there's another set of 4 here. This is to make sure that the water goes into the pipes and is collected underneath the factory. There's a great view of more of the wiring and the rack mounts that are being prepared for all of the wiring that will connect all to the north of the factory along the east parapet wall and connect into the conduit that is being put into trenches across Tesla Road and up to the electrical switch yard. And when we get to the electrical switch yard, I have some new information about some expansion work to support the supercomputer cluster that is going on here in the south end. It's a great view of some of the materials and the preparation work on the roof to continue with finishing that section out. On the bottom of the screen, we can see those rack mounts and where all the cabling will follow that perimeter, the parapet wall up to the north end of the factory. Looking down on the east side, we get a great view of the underside of the chiller plant. Also a view into the wall section with those ventilation panels open and the huge water pipes that are continuing to be installed in this trench. On the ground, we can see that mud base in preparation for more of the concrete mounts to support the pipes, and then the termination points that are in those form-like areas underneath the chiller plant. And then, of course, the pipes will go to the north and south, resting on those concrete pads that are cast into the ground slab with those semicircular cutouts. Here's a great view again of the pipes and the forms to pour out the concrete for the kind of the retaining straps all along that entire pipe to keep it from moving with all of the water that will be flowing through that section. As I continue to maneuver the drone to the east, it's a great view of the cooling or the chiller plant itself with the 6 fans and the ducts on the roof, again with the vents on the sides, a great look on the inside, and of course the work that's going on for the electrical systems and many components being installed on the ground floor. Also a good view into the east side of the extension, and a good view of the main and second floor with some of the mezzanine floors and of course some of the interior walls that are being fitted out. And I'm going to continue to pull away from that south end, give you a good overall view of how it looks, and also a view of this lined pond and how it is continuing to transform. There is a fence around the pond now, and it looks like a kind of a perimeter roadway that's being constructed. Speaking of which, on the bottom of the screen, the preparation for the River Road extension through this area continues. Looks like gravel mix is being placed along the side and a lot of trailers and equipment being stored temporarily. The bottom of the screen is where the intersection with Robotic Avenue will eventually take place. And at the bottom of the screen, going through the trees, the extension of River Road will eventually continue that direction. On the east side of the multi-level parking garage on the ground, that's going to be additional parking once that is finished and paved, and that will add to the total amount of parking capability in the structure. And as we talked in my previous video, all of that combined will be for about 6,000 vehicles. On the ground, we can see some tents and a shuttle bus. This shows that this facility is being used now for employees. We can see some vehicles parked on the ground floor as well. And this partially answers viewer questions of how are they going to get from the garage to the factory, and that'll be shuttle buses. On the bottom of the screen, we can see that they are preparing what may be more walk paths on this west side. And this is a great view of the east side of the factory, those temporary cooling units on the ground on the trailers, and that's until those large ducts on that kind of that clean rectangular section in the top center of the screen is completed, and the chiller plant on the inside of the factory becomes operational. Has a good view of the north side of the multi-level parking garage. The parking area on the left and in the middle may also be additional parking, but that'll be something that we'll have to continue to monitor as things change. But of course, they do have a lot of materials and the pipes for the underground water management system stored there. Next to the helicopter pad, the wind tunnel on the right no longer has the green trailer that was providing the power, so it looks like it's being prepared for dismantling, and the Rainmaker on the left is in a similar situation. And again, I expect those to be moved to the west side soon. This is a great view of more of the Model Ys stored here and some of the Cybertrucks on this part of the site. And also, as we look across, a great view of the number of castings that continue to be stored here on the east side, some of the receiving doors, and of course the secondary main entrance, and also more of these new receiving doors and those orange kind of ventilation ducting, bringing air conditioning into that area. As I continue to maneuver towards the north, just pay attention to the number of castings and also this dirt section, which is continuing recent preparations to hopefully get that finished, and then we'll see the concrete poured so that those receiving doors can be operational. As we continue to fly to the north, more castings. That'll be kind of the theme of this entire section of the factory. And we can see that the baghouse filtration plant is getting many of those items that we saw on the west side material staging installed today, particularly on that south end. So we have the support galvanized structure with several of those box units. It looks like some kind of ventilation ducting inlets are being installed on this east side, and more of the foundation work with that formed rectangular section on the north waiting for concrete. As I bring the drone up to a little higher altitude, I will swing back over to give you some really good views of the installation of the equipment on the south end of the baghouse filtration plant, and how this is continuing to transform. Now I expect to see more equipment installed onto the main galvanized superstructure, and then some of those tanks that we saw on the west side installed here as well. It's a great bird's eye view looking straight down at how this assembly of this plant is coming along and how some of the concrete work underneath the galvanized this galvanized steel is looking now. On this north pad area where they're working on the ground, we can see more electrical conduit being installed with those risers next to the wall, and reconfiguration work of those receiving doors continues. As we maneuver around the northeast corner of the factory, see more of those rack mounts with castings, and straight ahead, more trench work to work on that conduit that I mentioned earlier in the video. Now, the wires that will go through the conduit here will terminate up at the electrical switch yard, and we'll get closer views of that here in a moment. And then they follow the parapet wall along the entire length of the building and enter into that new south extension where I showed you earlier in the video. This is a great view of the current situation with the trenching and preparation for the conduit on this part of the factory. More castings in front of the new receiving doors by the casting section and the paint shop. More of the rack mounts for the bodies on the ground on the bottom left. And as we get close to the 4680 cell production portion of the factory, workers are busy adding the textured finishing material onto these kind of yellow walls. Those will then be kind of stained white to match, and it looks like, at least for now, they are closing in this section, giving some receiving doors underneath the platforms, and having most of the work on the inside now the focus of bringing on all 8 of the 4680 production portions of the factory on a line later this year. We also saw that large truck bringing some more equipment. On the berm here and all the way along the entire west side, continued work to install fiber optic cabling through this area. They've been using horizontal drilling through much of this section, and as I follow the berm, this gives you a good idea of where all of this fiber optic cable is being installed, how it routes through this part of the factory, and it goes all the way down to the south bridge of the entire site. So it's extensive amount of fiber optic cable. Also a good look at that work next to that receiving door with the green temporary panel, and eventually that will be completed with concrete and reshape that entire area. Now, as we fly up over the roof and the north parking lot, I'm going to bring us down, cross over Tesla Road, and we'll take a look at more of the conduit that is being installed here on this part of the site. It's a great view of how the conduit extends underneath Tesla Road through this section. Then it works its way up towards where we see these concrete vault lids on the ground in the vaults. It turns 90 degrees, goes under the power lines, and then turns 90 degrees again and goes up to the electrical switch yard. Now, on the left-hand side of the screen, we can see the Megapack site and how it looks today, and of course the electrical switch yard and the top of the screen. I'm going to stop here, and I want to say thank you to Desi Doolin and David Johnson for some information that they passed along to me that they found. This comes from the Bluebonnet Electric Cooperative Monthly Report to Board of Directors. And in this recent document, they talked about approving the purchase requisitions for a substation expansion project to add a third substation transformer to the Hornsby substation. The Hornsby substation is the electrical switchyard here at Giga Texas, as you can see by the inset map. And the third transformer will be installed in the section with the arrow, and it looks very open right now. You can see that most of the superstructure is in place on the north end, and on the bottom of the screen where those 2 trailers are, there's actually space for a third on top of that underground vault that we saw being constructed in the middle of last year. Here's a good close-up view of that. And where that kind of scaffolding is on top of that vault roof, that's where I expect to see a third trailer, and then of course the next transformer and some of the other equipment that will be needed to be added to allow that to be operational. And all of this is going to be connecting into all of the conduit that we've been seeing the wires that go along the parapet wall all the way to the south end to support the supercomputer cluster. We also know from Elon Musk's recent posting that currently it's going to be up to about 130 megawatts of power that will be needed, but within 18 months it's going to extend to 500 megawatts. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to upgrade the capacity here, and adding that third transformer will go a long way to correcting, or at least meeting the power requirements for the supercomputer cluster. And this is a great view of where that work is going to happen on the left-hand side of the screen. So I'm going to bring the drone up to a higher altitude, and we're going to reposition over towards the battery cathode plant and just take a quick look at activity over there today. Here on the north end of the battery cathode plant complex, a good view of how this looks with the main factory in the far distance. Some of the materials that are still stored here, and of course some of the concrete that's still waiting for recycling. It's a great view of the east side of the structure, the cell test lab at the bottom of the screen, the wade pit, the new gray trailers for the contractors. And as I continue to maneuver the drone, we're going to see 3 new doors that have been added here over the last several months, and recently it looks like another one's being added. This will allow access into the structure. You can see some equipment that's already been delivered on the opening on the right, a new concrete kind of apron being prepared in front of that section where maybe they're going to be adding in some sort of windows. It's hard to tell with the framing that's going on, and of course the open section on the upper left. It's also a good view of the crash test facility that is still being used a lot here on the east side of the structure. And on the roof section on the south end, it looks like there's damage, but it's not. It's just a fabric cloth that was kind of a curtain that's been cut down, and the wind is blowing up onto the top. So I know a lot of viewers keep saying that they think that there's damage to the crash test facility, but there is not. So I'm going to maneuver the drone back, a good view looking at Giga Texas across the employee overflow yard, and also the warehouse on wheels yard, plus a lot of the contractor materials on the left. So anyway, I hope that you enjoyed these views, the sunrise, the information that I presented in the intro, and everything else in between. As always, thank you very much for your support. Have a great weekend.